Conversations with Azu Ishiekwene.
Hello. We are dedicating today's episode of our program to the passing of General Muhammadu Buhari, former Nigerian president, who departed this earth life on the 13th of July, 2025. Buhari is about the only one of his class of former Nigerian leaders who served as governor, as minister, as chairman of the Petroleum Trust Fund, and eventually as an elected democratic president of the Federal Republic. Given the high levels of authority he exercised, the late general cannot be linked with any layers of obscene riches and material possessions as other public officers, many of whom never got close to the levels of Buhari's advantage. It is a fact that he remains the only head of state who never promoted himself beyond the rank of a major general, even when it was his absolute discretion to do so. During campaigns for the 2015 elections, which he won, Buhari famously said, "I have no money to give, and even if I had, I wouldn't give money to people to vote for me." And during his inauguration as president, he would profoundly say, "I belong to everybody, and I belong to nobody." This statement, apart from being the defining part of his public personality, became the invisible undertone of his presidency. Welcome to Conversation with Azu, our weekly diary on life and politics. And today our topic is musings on Muhammadu Buhari. And Azu, the writer of the column, as always, is here with me on set to discuss. Welcome to Conversation, Azu.
Thanks for having me, Judith.
All right. So you met with General Buhari several times and interviewed him in his lifetime. What manner of a person would you say he came across to you as?
Good question. As I said in my column, he was an enigma. I mean, it didn't matter that I met with him and interviewed him, but I still was not able to, in his lifetime, put my finger on how, it's not very easy to define former President Muhammadu Buhari. And I'll just give you a few examples. And I think I also mentioned one or two of them in my column today. Buhari, for example, loved jokes, and I'm sure that a lot has been said about that. But he also was a very serious person. He abhorred materialism, obviously. But then also there were a lot of people around him who sort of reveled in materialism and made stupendous wealth. He was very little spoken. And there was a time that people were talking about body language as a psychology of reading his government. But then his actions affected the length and breadth of this country for many years. So very complicated, persona, if I may say so. But I guess that was who he was.
With the benefit of hindsight, you would say Buhari was not a politician. He wasn't cut out to be. And eventually he was dragged into politics. What do you think this affected his performance in government?
I think it might have. I think his disposition both to life and his worldview might have obviously affected, his effectiveness in office. I've often said that perhaps if there was a position in Nigeria like that of a ceremonial president, Buhari was one person who came across to me as somebody who, would have been a good ceremonial president and then allow the prime minister or the executive head of the government to get the job done. But I think he sort of wanted that last opportunity, even though he, on camera, he shed tears on camera and said, look, he was never going to do it again. I think he also there was something in him that wanted it to sort of fix some of the problems he couldn't fix, in his brief term as a military ruler. And I think there was something in him that desired and wanted it. But then what he did when he got it, for a combination of reasons, was entirely something different.
All right. Many Nigerians blame General Buhari for the economic slide in the country since 2015. But instructively, your friend and author Jonathan Power, in his book, put the blame squarely on the feet of former President Goodluck Jonathan, who, made a lot of wealth from the sale of oil, and all of it was frittered away. What's your take?
Well, interestingly, at two different times when Buhari came to power, the economy was really in a very poor
Bad
state.
shape.
Yeah, in a bad shape. First in 1983 when he came, and of course back again when he came in 2015. There was serious recession, and then that recession was also then mostly caused by COVID. COVID made things, and then the entire economy was in a shambles, and the global economy and supply chain, a number of which, part of which the world has not fully recovered from. So you may say that there were external factors, some of which I've mentioned. Because of the structure of Nigeria's economy as well, it's an economy that is really tied to revenues from oil. So he came at periods when oil revenues were very, very low, and government revenues, as a consequence of that, as a result of that, government also had very little to do a lot with. So that may have affected. But you see, again, it's what it is, and I know people who have said, look, when you put yourself forward for an office, you are putting yourself up for both sides, but both the good and the bad. You take it all together. You cannot desire an office and say, look, I want only the pleasant side of it, or it's not it doesn't work that way. And so a number of the steps that people believe, and I believe justifiably so, that his government ought to have taken, especially in his second term when he came in as a civilian president, to fix some of the structural problems with the economy, he sort of prevaricated significantly in taking those decisions. They were tough decisions that needed to be taken, especially to win Nigeria off the subsidy problem, which had become a major problem and albatross, and also to fix the foreign exchange and the forex system. Those were significant problems, the state of the refineries. Those were major problems that he had an approach avoidance conflict about how to deal with, With ultimately then, he just kept kicking the can down the road, and which was then something that the current administration had to inherit.
I remember his media aide, Garba Shehu, did say if Buhari had removed subsidy, APC would not have won the 2023 elections.
Well, you see, the thing about governance, it's not just about winning elections. It's about statesmanship and taking the right decisions. Okay, so if it was just if governance was if the life of a nation depended on just winning and losing elections, that's partly where politicians then act purely out of
self-interest,
self-preservation, or out of self-preservation, just out of a matter of convenience. I believe that, although one must also admit that the state of his health, he was in and out of hospital for over 140 or 150 days. I don't remember the exact number of days when he had health problems. And of course, when someone has health problems, everything else becomes secondary. So that obviously also affected him, but took 6 months to put a cabinet together, which didn't help matters for a country that was more or less in a state of emergency. All right, it took 6 months to form his cabinet. And not long after he formed his cabinet, of course, he had to then travel abroad for his health problems, and for months he was away, and so forth. But I think that on the whole, if he was sufficiently persuaded that those decisions needed to have been taken, he should have taken them. And folks who worked with him also then said that, he set the stage, because later that the last budget before he left office, there was no place for subsidy in that budget, which meant that he then came to the decision when they thought it was a problem. But he had about 8 years to do so. and didn't do anything, which I didn't think served the country or his administration well.
All right, we take a pause from our question and answer session as I bring you an excerpt from Azu's article. So please take a listen, and I quote, "Except for the legend of Ahmadu Bello or perhaps Aminu Kano, no single individual in northern Nigeria has commanded the cult following and mass appeal that the late Buhari had. His reputation as an honest man effortlessly earned him a fanatical followership among ordinary folks. It became his best political capital, which, despite himself, was used to drag him into politics. A terrain a reclusive Buhari would have viewed from a distance." End of quote. So, on the one hand, his detachment was a boost to the democratic process. On the flip side, it translated to a lack of supervision for his appointees. Which of these attributes impacted the wars in Nigerian state?
Delegation is a fundamental principle of any form of management. But delegation and abdication do not exactly mean the same thing, all right? And I think that many will argue, and quite rightly, I believe that to a large extent, Buhari abdicated significant responsibility, especially in areas where his government ought to have been in charge, reining his ministers in some of the things that happened, the Air Nigeria fiasco, for example, the Attorney General and Minister of Justice at that time. You know, there were major players and principals of his government that should have been reined in and kept on the straight and narrow, and but which he didn't do, which was not to his credit or to the credit of the country at all. So yes, I mean, but I think that shouldn't come as a surprise, because as you said in your intro, that was also reflected in his statement that it belonged to everybody and belonged to nobody. It was basically a philosophy of
I mind my business,
you mind
your business.
But one thing that a number of persons have also said, I think I do agree to it. Whatever it was that sort of threatened his office directly, he acted almost swiftly. Like when the judges had to be raided because they said that Justice Onogin at that time was in cahoots with some persons to destabilize the system. But I think that Buhari's style of administration, it's good to, when you delegate, you also allow people to get the job done. But I think it was more in critical cases of abdication than it was a matter of delegation.
All right, my final question. Buhari supporters trusted him and turned him into a strong rallying point. Buhari himself didn't seem to believe in personality cult.
Yeah.
Personality cult.
Cult, yes.
Yes. Are we likely to see a successor, another Buhari, in the near future?
Oh, it's an interesting question. One, I think, which was posed by leadership in one of the editions the day after Buhari passed, whether about the succession battle starting. I think that people are different in their own ways, all right? So the Saudana was different in his own way and in his own time, as Aminu Kano was, and so forth and so on. And then we had Buhari, disdained and despised by the northern elites, but loved by by
people on the street.
Yeah, he was a man of the street and all of that. I think that there are quite a number of politicians who have a few of those attributes. If you look around, but we just have to wait and see whether they are able to seize the opportunity of this moment, because clearly you see clearly that the North appears to be in a very difficult place, in terms of looking for somebody in that stature, in that mold. But let's see whether the array of current Northern politicians we have, from the vice president to a number of them across the country, are able to seize the moment and see what they make out of it. But obviously, you also must have seen from the case of Buhari that it's not just enough to be loved and respected and revered in one section of the country. If you want to be a national leader, then you have to have attributes that actually cut across. And I'm sure that if they also look at some of the weaknesses in Buhari's style and account for and take that into account in how they position themselves, perhaps, who knows, we might even have a more charismatic leader from the north.
All right. You can read the full text of this conversation on ishiekwene.com. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share our content. And if you are a writer and interested in monetizing content, we have a book. Just go to ishiekwene.com for more details. Thanks for coming on the conversation.
Thanks for having me again. It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Bye for now.
Conversations with Ishiekwene.